morning. Glad to see everybody here this morning. I am substituting for Bill. He went to the Marshall game, and guess he had a good time. He called me yesterday morning to make sure I got the message where to start, and he was someplace standing in line for breakfast. I said, "Well, I just got the Tudors." He said, "Well, I wish there was a Tudors down here." So, but anyway, I guess he got his breakfast. But anyway, we're going to start in the Proverbs, the 12th chapter with verse 8, and we're going to kind of continue in those thoughts that Bill was talking about last week. Hopefully we'll get several verses done today. So before we go any further, I'd like for Keith Davis, if he would, to lead our minds in prayer.
Heavenly Father, thank you so much for letting us do this. Thank you for this opportunity to gather together with one desire to learn and study in your Holy Word. In the day as He breaks the bread of life unto us, we pray, Father, we have a recollection of all that He has studied and put forth the lesson, Father, that we can clean this from today. Help us in our daily walk. Most thankful, Father, for your Son Jesus, and for the love and the shame that the Calvary's cross has done for us.
All right, so let's look at verse 8. A man shall be praised according to his wisdom, but he who is have a perverse heart shall be despised. So according to this verse, the people respect and say good things about a person who has sound judgment, but they kind of sneer at those whose thinking is distorted. And there's certainly a tendency to criticize others not because of how they think, but rather, they. But whether they agree with us or not, and everybody is going to have disagreements with something. Nobody is going to completely think alike, and I think this is something we can think about now with all the if it seems like if you don't agree with somebody, then there's a lot of problems. But this is just a matter of poor judgment, not being that way. In most cases, a fair-minded person is recognized and respected even by those who strongly disagree with their conclusion. That's kind of the way it used to be, but sometimes I don't think today it's quite like that. In 1 Samuel 3 provides a striking contrast between the wise Samuel and the sons of Eli. And the son's thinking obviously was distorted. Samuel ministered before the Lord and spoke with the integrity and sound judgment, but Eli's sons had evil minds, and they were sinning against the Lord. So when the Lord called Samuel to serve as a prophet, a priest, and a judge, he told him, "Behold, I am about to do a thing in Israel at which the two ears of everyone who hears will tingle. So on that day I will fulfill against Eli and all that have spoken concerning his house from the beginning to the end. And I declare to him that I am about to punish his house forever for the iniquity that he knew, because his sons were blaspheming God and did not restrain them." So, the people lost respect for Eli because of the things that his sons were saying at the time. They were blaspheming against the Lord. So Samuel was speaking wise things to Israel, and the people knew that Samuel was established as a prophet of the Lord. So he was speaking these sound things. So the things that we speak and using common sense and good things along that line is going to be a benefit to us versus the ones who just get out there and blather all the time. Comments about that verse? Okay, let's move on to verse 9. Better is one despised than having a servant than he honoring himself and lacks bread. So Solomon here exhorts the wisdom and exhorts the virtue of humility. And he contrasts here is both kind of funny but it's very profound. And it makes no sense to be arrogant when that attitude leaves you destitute. And there's no shame in being humble when your humility is part of your success. And in other words, it's better to be successful or appear to be successful. And according to the passage such as this, it's better to be obscure and meek and successful than to be a braggart whose reputation goes well beyond his actual accomplishments. So the empty boaster stands in sharp contrast to the humble man, and his life is as empty as his boasts. You know, David displayed a lot of humility in his life, and when Saul's servants told David that Saul wanted him to become his son-in-law, David replied, you know, does it seem to you a little thing to become a king's son-in-law since I'm a poor man and of no reputation? We can read about that in 1 Samuel 18 and 23. And although the Lord Jesus was the Son of God, he humbled himself and became as a man, and he described himself as gentle and lowly in heart. Now the apostles, John and Peter, they were apostles. That was their credentials. They didn't even have any money, to give to the beggar. But Peter, humbly told me, he says, "I have neither silver or gold, but what I do have, I give you. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk." So he gave him something a whole lot more valuable than silver and gold there. And of course, the Apostle Paul displayed humility by identifying himself as the foremost of sinners. That was in 1 Timothy 1 and 15. So, humility goes a long way, beyond the braggart who doesn't have anything. And there are people today that they put on a good show, but they really don't have anything to show for it. And one of I can't remember if it was on the radio or the TV, they say down in Texas that's called all hat and no cattle. So that's kind of a situation that you run into there. So being humble is a very important trait for us to have. Any comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verse 10. A righteous one understands the souls of animals, but the tender mercies of the wicked are cruel. So this verse is an important perspective for a biblical view on animal rights. And, God created all the animals for the use of mankind. We can read that in Genesis. We have dominion over the animals, and the animals were there for our benefits. But while God created all animals for the use of mankind, he also expects us to respect and care for the resources and not abuse them. And that not only the animals in this case, but everything that God gives us, we need to respect and we need to use it properly. So in fact, Solomon connects a person's righteousness to their treatment of animals. The point is not that those who love God must be vegetarians, nor giving that's kind of an idol type of value, or give some type of special sense or value to an animal, put it up on some type of pedestal or something like that. But the message is that a godly perspective on creation naturally leads to respect for all creatures. And it's kind of funny, there's a link in a lot of psychological things with criminals to animal cruelty. Their mindset is in such a way that there's cruelty to animals. And the one that comes to mind is a pyromaniac. One of the psychological attributes of a pyromaniac is they have a history of cruelty to animals. And if you ever want to read something or study something that's interesting, study a pyromaniac. All these attributes that they have, and you can actually see that in the people who were pyromaniacs. We had one at down in Huntington years ago. His name was Queenie. And Queenie set 14 or 15 fires that we knew of. And when they would bring him in to question him and stuff, you could just check the things off as you were talking to him, the attributes that he had. And one of them, I say, was cruelty to animals. So, there's a lot of wisdom here as far as, the animal treating and how people do it. So, a God-fearing person is going to, treat the animals kindly, going to feed them properly, going to care for them when they're hurt and things like that. And in his regard for animals, the righteous person resembles the good shepherd. Of course, Jesus is the good shepherd, and the good shepherd always, takes care of the basic needs of his flock. And it's just a general matter of, if you've got animals, especially like if you've got dairy cattle, or if you've got beef cattle, or you've got pigs, or something like that. If you're going to get the benefit from them, you've got to take care of them. If you don't feed your dairy cattle, you're not going to get any milk. If you don't feed your beef cattle, you're not going to get much on the hoof when you take them to the market. So, there's a lot of wisdom in here on taking care of your animals. We need to protect them and do the things that we need to do with them. So in regards to his animals, the righteous person resembles Jesus in these situations. And there's a lot of scriptures that goes along with with the flock and the good shepherd and things like that. And of course, it brings to mind the second verse of the 23rd Psalm. Now, and also there's some related passages in Deuteronomy, the 25th chapter, starting with verse 4, that commands the farmers of Israel not to muzzle an ox when it's treading out the grain. And you think about it, this ox is doing some work here, and the owner would muzzle the ox not to let him get a little bit of grain while he's doing his work. That's the type. And we've got people like that are so stingy and so thinking about money that it's the same principle. They'll muzzle their people from doing things just so that they won't have to pay for it, or save a little bit of time, or save a little bit of money. But the results are not good. If you would go on and spend that little extra money and treat your people right, you're going to get a lot better. You're going to get a lot better results. So this is in contrast to the godly attitudes. A wicked person's approach to animals can't be anything more than than cruelty. And we see that even in their mercy in such a case is relatively harsh and abusive. They think that they're doing good. And cruelty to animals is seen today in things like staged dog fights and cockfights and things along that line. People starve their animals. They don't take care of them. And if you need an example of that, go see some of those poor animals that get brought into the Humane Society down there on James River Road, down there at the animal shelter. Some of that stuff, they need to find out who's taking care of those people and take them out and wheel a tar out of them. That's probably what they need to do to them. So believers need to be careful not to evaluate animals to be equal with humans, but they also need to prevent animal cruelty and take good care of their pets and not tolerate people that abuse their pets, because this reflects a godly attitude toward creation and respect for the things that God.
Well, that's just what I was going to say. It goes to all of God's creation. He gave it to us to use, and so it is there for us to use. But at the same time, we're not to abuse it. So it extends to everything.
Yeah, we need to respect it to the point that it came from God, and
right.
God, and that's a matter of respect. Other comments? All right, let's look at verse 11. He who tills his land shall be satisfied with bread, but he who follows vanities lack heart. So in this verse, Solomon contrasts the values of productive work with the foolishness of wasting time. And in Israel's agricultural society, the wise farmer understood the high importance of working the land at the right time. plowing it at the right time, seeding it at the right time. All of these things were essential to having a good harvest. And you know, back then you couldn't go to the grocery store and buy stuff year round. I mean, this all had to be done at the right time because that was the way, you know, the people put food on the table. So in contrast to that, you've got a fool who would spend his time, you know, doing other things and, you know, pursuing fantasies and you know, whatever foolish things they could get into, and not doing things the way that they need to be done. And you can kind of put procrastinators in that category also, that just keeps putting things off. Next thing you know, they've missed the boat. So in modern context, it makes sense for a person to pursue employment, care for their homes and family and as such, because a foolish person leaves those tasks undone while they spend their time on unimportant things. And you know, there's a lot of stuff out there that we can do that'll get us distracted from what we should be doing. And you know, anybody that's ever owned a house, you know, you've got to do some maintenance on it. You've got to do maintenance on your car. You've got to do those things. And unfortunately, it takes time. And the people who get distracted and don't take care of these things, you know, they're going to have problems. Now, one thing that this scripture does not forbid is rest, relaxation, and fun. You know, God does not expect us to, you know, to work ourselves into a joyless exhaustion. You know, it was a toil for God to create the earth. But what did he do on the seventh day? He rested. And you know, he made the seventh day, you know, he sanctified the seventh day, you know, as a day of rest. So, you know, we need to work when we need to work, and we need to rest when we need to rest. And that rest is important, because if you constantly work, eventually your efficiency is going to go down the drain, because you're so tired that you can't function the way that you need to do. So the important thing is do things when they need to be done. Rest when you need to when you need to rest. Comments about that verse? Okay. So let's move on to verse 12. The wicked desires the net of evils, but the root of the righteous yields fruit. So according to this verse, wicked people are never content with what they have. They're even jealous sometimes for, you know, what other evil people had, or what they're able to gain. And one could imagine this person as being like a weed or a parasite that exists only to suck the life out of others. But in contrast, the person who follows godly wisdom is like a healthy root that supports a fruit-bearing plant or tree. And the truly righteous person is content with what the Lord, you know, provides. And you know, sometimes we get a tendency to look at what other people have and think, I'd really like to have that, but we're not really willing to do the work that it takes to get that. And we need to be glad for what other people have, especially, you know, if they've worked hard for it. And if we have that attitude and we're happy with what we got, especially in this country. I mean, you know, you look at the stuff that we have. Even the poorest person in this country would be a millionaire in some of the other countries out there. So, you know, we really need to be, content with that. Jesus taught us not to obsess over material goods here on the earth, but rather we should focus on building up treasures in heaven. That's talked about in Matthew, the 6th chapter. The wicked person, strives to obtain treasures here on earth, but to him life consists only in the worldly goods and has no interest in what's eternal. They just see all the things that they can gather here. The righteous person, on the other hand, sees life in the perspective of eternity, and he lives to honor the Lord, and he does not worry about the material things. And that's not to say, we have to worry about certain material things, but we don't want to obsess on having material things. We need to seek the things that are above, where Christ is, and seated at the right hand of God. That's from Colossians 3 and 1. And his life is fruitful because he walks, we walk by the Spirit. And, if we do that, we're going to have a happy life, and we're going to be blessed a whole lot more than just, spiritual blessings. We're going to have spiritual blessings, and we're going to have a good state of mind and a happy life. And, you look at a lot of these people that obsess over boats and cars and different things. Those people are miserable most of the time, because that's all they're worried about is getting, where's the next worldly thing going to come from. And sometimes they can't see the forest for the trees, and they miss the fun stuff, and they get to the end of their life and they don't have anything to show for it. There's no memories, and there's not a lot to show for it. Comments about that verse? All right, let's move on to verse 13. The wicked is snared by the transgression of his lips, but the just shall come out of trouble. So Solomon teaches that an evil person is entangled in a trap by what he says. So a common English expression here would be the web of lies, speaking to the complicated tangle that comes with dishonesty. And a natural, unavoidable risk of deceit is that those webs are eventually going to collapse on themselves. And sooner or later, a liar will be caught in their own web, or in their own lies that they tell. So as Solomon notes, the ungodly person lies about others and curses them, but his evil speaking eventually will boomerang and ensnare him also. Now in Psalm 7 and 16 declares that the wicked man's mischief returns upon his own head, and on his own skull the violence descends. So this also comes with an eternal component. The wicked man's corrupt words are evidence of his corrupt nature, and they will hold him accountable on the day of judgment. Jesus said, I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give an account for every careless word they speak. For by your words you will be justified, by your words you will be condemned. That's Matthew 12, 36 and 37. So because a righteous person speaks the words that discloses the righteous nature of his heart, he will not be condemned. And those who tell the truth won't have to worry about catching themselves in their own lies. What usually happens is you tell the first lie, and then you have to tell the second lie to cover the first lie. And then you have to tell the third lie, and you go back and forth. And somewhere along the line, you're going to forget what the first lie was, and you're going to tell the truth, and then you're going to be in trouble. And that's what happens a lot of times. So if you tell the truth all the time, then you don't have to worry about getting yourself caught up in a lie. So those who tell the truth don't have to worry about catching themselves in their own lies.
Judge Judy says if you tell the truth, you don't have to have a good memory.
That's right. That's right. That's very good. So words matter, and therefore they should be expressed thoughtfully and prayerfully. And we've talked about this lots of times. You got two ears and one mouth, and you need to get the brain engaged before you get the mouth engaged. So we need to be careful about what we say, and sometimes, even though we would like to say something, it's probably better in certain cases to just keep our mouth shut. So if the word of Christ dwells in a person richly, edifying and graceful words will come from that. Will come from that conversation. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verse 14. A man shall be satisfied with good by the fruit of his mouth, and the reward of a man's hands shall be given him. So Solomon alleges here that a man's good words produce satisfaction. And this means that honest, godly words come back to him with as much benefit as the works of his hands. Now in Ecclesiastes 11:1 it says, cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. So by blessing others with kind, encouraging words, a righteous person will gain the respect and love of others. And Jesus taught that goodness and kindness will always be repaid. He says, judge not, and you will not be judged. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given unto you. So good measure, pressed down, shaken together, runs over, will put in your lap. So for the measure that you give, you're basically going to get that measure, back. So, we need to be good to people, and if we're good to people, then in return, they're going to be good to you when the time comes and when you need it the most. And I think that everybody knows of cases where people that have been good to people all their lives, when they get in trouble, people return the favor and help them out. And I think I told you the story about my nanny. She wasn't really my nanny, but she was so good to people all through the years when she lived there in Danville, and when she got sick at the end of her life, she couldn't get out of the house. People just they all took care of her because she was so good to people, all those years. And that was a good lesson, I know, for me, and it made an impression on me, and it made think about things like that. So words wisely spoken echo back to a righteous person from the lips of those whom he blesses, and therefore thereby satisfies the heart. Any question about or comments about that verse? All right, let's move on to verse 15. The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but he who listens to advice is wise. So one of the primary hallmarks of a fool is in this scripture is pretty much summarized here. The root word is evil, which in Hebrew means hard-headed, thick-headed person who will not listen to reason. And I'm sure that we can all think of somebody who meets that description. This is not a person lacking in intelligence, but someone who refuses to let sound advice penetrate their head. And the same concept is applied back in Proverbs 1:7 as a fundamental reason why people don't respond to godly truth. Proverbs chapter 10 reflects the kind of foolishness that multiplies multiple times. We talked a lot about that back in chapter 10. And a fool rejects the counsel nature provided that that God exists. In Romans 1:19, it says, because the thing which may be known of God is clearly revealed. My flicker doesn't work today. I wore it out at Spring Valley, and I didn't check it today before I came. Okay. Bill said he's laughing at me for my technology here. Okay. So anyway, Romans 19:20, because the thing which should be known of God, which is clearly revealed within him, for God revealed it to them. For the unseen things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen and realized by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, for them be without excuse. So, he convinces himself, that there is no God, and this is a real problem, that, God is out there, and whether the people think that or not. Psalms 14:1 declares, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. So a person may have a PhD, but, he's a fool if he denies the existence of God. Well, let me tell you what. There's a lot of them running around these days. you know, and I think that, you know, the kind thing to say would be they're an educated idiot. And, you know, that is becoming more and more of a problem in our, you know, in our society. And furthermore, a person who trusts in the riches instead of in God is a fool, because those riches are going to go away. So in a parable, God calls a certain rich farmer a fool because he trusted in the bountiful harvest instead of in trusting God. And what happened to him? He lost everything. You know, he built all these great things. He thought he had it made, and you know, it was all taken away from him. So Proverbs 14 and 12 assures us there is a way that seems right to man, but its end is the way of death. So by contrast, a wise man is going to heed the advice of God, and he accepts the nature's testimony that God, you know, that God exists. And I'm sure over the years we've heard many, many sermons about the proof that, you know, that God exists. And, you know, but there's still people out there, you know, they talk about creation. The Big Bang Theory. You know, how would you come up with something like that? Take a thing of lumber, stick a piece of dynamite over it, blow the thing up, and you get a barn. It doesn't happen. You know, and you think about how complicated the human body is. We don't understand it now after all these years, but God put it together just like that. And everything works together. You know, how could that happen by accident? But there's people who, you know, who deny that we, I guess, slithered it out of the pond somewhere. But, you know, where did the slithering thing come from the pond? I mean, it doesn't make sense there. Comments about that verse? All right, let's move on to verse 16. A fool's vexation is known in a day, but the astute one covers shame. So the prior verse in Proverbs 12 and 15 spoke of a fool as a person who is hard-headed or stubborn or resistant to advice. And when such a person is annoyed, perhaps by a sharp disagreement or an insult, he loses control and he shows his anger. Does this not happen today in spades? You know, somebody gets out there and they make a comment that somebody doesn't like, and because they don't have an argument, they go off and they start, you know, losing control and screaming and yelling and attacking the person instead of attacking the concept. So in contrast, a wise person stays calm under similar circumstances. So, and you think about it, the calmer that you stay in an argument, the louder it makes the other person sound. And and that just makes the situation a whole lot worse. And if you stay calm in the situation and keep the mind working, you're going to make a whole lot better defense of your position than somebody who just kind of flies off in anger and completely loses their mind in the deal. So there's a strange contradiction in the life of someone who strongly resists correction, yet succumbs quickly to their own frustrations. And then again, both problems have the same root cause, which is arrogance. A wise person controls his emotion. He does not fly off the handle at the slightest provocation. He manifests self-control, which is produced by the Holy Spirit. And we can read about that in Galatians 5:22 and 23. So the Apostle Peter reminds us that Jesus is not reviled in return when he was reviled. Neither did he threaten others when he suffered. Instead, he continued entrusting himself to who judges justly. And this is in 1 Peter 2 and 23. In 1 Peter 3, 9 through 11, Peter writes, "Do not repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling. Whosoever desires to love life sees good days. Let him keep his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it." So it's a mark of godliness to remain calm when circumstances and mean-spirited people annoy us. And there's plenty of mean-spirited people out there that can annoy people. And you know, if you're out in the public sphere quite a bit, you know, you're gonna see those people. Any comments about that verse? Okay, let's move on to verse 17. He who breathes truth shows forth righteousness, but a false witness deceit. So the comment made here seems like a truism, a self-affirming or obvious remark at first. Taken lightly, the English translation seems to say honest people are honest and liars lie. But the context of these phrases, however, involve the kind of evidence and witnesses one might expect to see in a courtroom. So the word for truth here is umila, implying a person's perception of what is real and actual, a sincere, open conviction. And also the Hebrew indicates a person who breathes truth. This is natural form. They just naturally speak the truth. The person whose life is marked by natural, innate honesty gives trustworthy testimony. And we can read about that in Matthew 5 and 23. And you know, we've talked about it before. You know, when we are young, we have to set our moral compass. And we have to do it early so that when we have to make a decision between right and wrong, we naturally go to the right without really thinking about it, because it is ingrained in our mind, the things that we do. So in contrast, the person who habitually lies can't be trusted no matter what they say. And of course, there's a saying out there that I like to say, which some people don't like, but I'm going to say it anyway. You get a politician, the only way you can tell if they're lying is to see if their mouth's moving. So, there are people like that I'm sure that all of us know, that you can't trust a word that they say, because the truth is just not in them, and they can take the truth and they can twist it around. So each witness reveals his character pretty much by what they say. Now the apostles Peter and John gave truthful evidence about Jesus before the rulers, the elders, and the scribes. They testified honestly that Jesus is the Messiah who had risen from the dead. And when the rulers, the elders, and the scribes commanded them not to speak or teach in the name of Jesus, the apostles answered, "We cannot speak of what we have seen and heard." So that's in Acts 4 and 20. They couldn't do anything other than telling the truth. They saw it, they knew it was correct, and their moral compass was set, and they were going to stick with what the truth was. Their honest witness showed clearly that they were righteous. On the other hand, the witness who had appeared before the chief priests and the Jewish council, they were deceitful. So in Matthew 26 and 59 reports that the chief priest and the whole council were seeking false testimony against Jesus that they might, put him to death. They were looking for people who were out there telling the things that they wanted to hear. They did not want to hear the truth, because the truth would not get them to where they wanted to be. And although many false witnesses showed up, they were disqualified, and all the false witnesses demonstrated their unrighteous character. So it didn't come out the way, because in the ultimate end, the truth is always going to prevail over a lie. And it may be that there's 10 people telling a lie, one person telling the truth. Eventually, the truth is going to come out. Now, it may take some time to do it, but the truth is eventually going to come out. And you can think about things that are in the news, and it goes along and along and along, and the falsehood goes through, and then all of a sudden the truth comes out. Now it may be on page 20 of the paper, but the truth is going to come out. Comments about that verse? All right. Are you ready to hang it up there? All right. So Bill can start at verse 18 next week, and I appreciate everybody's attention and comments today.